Welcome back to the Distant Vale. You'll be painting along with Harry again today. Today's mini is the Sorcerer from the Court of the Seven faction in Trench Crusade. And what I'm looking for here today is a super dark and desaturated mostly mini, and then I'm going to be trying to paint the ever-loving grief out of some fire effects. So first step is going to be doing some of the flesh tones here, and I'm wanting his skin to be a dark green. So I'm using an Australia green from the Army Painter. It just happens to be the first sort of black desaturated green I could lay my eyes on, and I'll be using a couple of different other sort of green tones to give that skin a little bit of interest. So to get it on the model, just thin it right down, whack it over the zenithal base color, that base priming. I'm not looking to get super strong coverage on this because we want to really let that zenithal undercoat do a bit of the lifting for us. Now, because we want it to be quite dark, we're going to be utilizing a few different but similar different techniques, similar across all the colors on the model. So what we're going to be doing is, with each color, we're putting on a few different shades in that same desaturated or sort of more black mixed family of colors, and then taking whatever is my sort of mid-tone color and mixing in some black acrylic ink to give myself a sort of pseudo shading paint. Now, to make it work like a shade paint, I just have to mix in some Airbrush flow improver, or you can get away with using a bit of dish detergent. They basically do the same thing. They help to break the surface tension in the actual paint medium, which means it will sort of settle into recesses much more easily, but because it's not a true wash, it will still tone everything down quite dark, with the effect hopefully being that this looks much more much less lit by light, except for what is on the model. So just to go back and cover the different paints I've used, so we've got an Australia green as our base green, Luftwaffe camo green from Vallejo, and now we're adding some dark angel green from the Army Painter. And I'm really just kind of splotching it on a little bit haphazardly. These are all different shades of green that are about the same level of saturation, so they don't necessarily look brighter next to each other, but on the mini when they dry, it's going to help break up the texture on the model, which is why I've gone through and done big base in Australia green, a little bit of blocky highlighting with the Luftwaffe camo green, and then dry brushed with the Dark Angels green. And now what you see here is I've done that dark wash with the black ink, and it should help to tone everything right down, so I can come back through with one of the colors. I've decided to go with the Luftwaffe green. It's a much more yellow green, using that as my final highlighting step, and the overall effect should be that it gives depth in the color on the model without actually brightening it up too much, so that when we start to paint the flame effects, they're the things that your eyes are drawn to most, and by comparison will make them look that much brighter. Coming on to the cloth components, I'm using Night Sky from the Army Painter, and again we're going to be putting on a fairly thin base color to start with, and then kind of dealer's choice at this point. You either mix in a little bit of grey to make the highlight up first, or you mix in the acrylic ink to get your shade, and then do that step first and then do the next step after. The benefit of doing the shade first is that you can clear any mistakes after you've done the shade painting a lot more easily than if you've already started highlighting. But the benefit of highlighting first is that it helps to blend the highlights together, especially on fabric. This can make them look a lot more organic and soft in terms of how they catch the light, rather than your sort of classic heavy metal edge highlighting starkness, which can be a really nice look if painting like a shiny fabric, but given that this is some pretty travel worn robes, I'm wanting to keep it nice and dull. So again, I'm going to come now through with the wash, which is again just a couple of drops of acrylic ink to darken it right down on whatever my mid-tone, or sort of in this case base tone, is. Chucking in some flow improver to help break the surface tension, and just slapping it all over the area we want to be shaded. And this should take it down to a fairly dark, sort of tinted black tone, as opposed to what came out the pot. Now the other thing too is when I was filming this, it was quite late at night, so it's going to be a lot in that bottom right hand corner and not a lot of using the entire screen. I may have set the camera up wrong and spent a lot more time filming my fingers than the actual painting. But what we're doing here is we've mixed in some Administratum Grey, which is a blue-grey that's quite bright. Mixed in a little bit of that to the original night sky. Right, next step, we want to paint up the skulls. So to get a nice desaturated shadow on these bones, I'll be using a Rhinox hide from Citadel. Using this just to base coat all the bones, and what it will give the model at the end step a really nice aged bone look. And it is an underrated thing of painting bones not in that sort of bleached bone khaki style, but instead reaching for more your browns or your yellows. They can give you a really nice variety if you are having to paint a lot of different bone features on a mini. Now for the highlight of this bone colour, what we're going to be doing is mixing in some ice yellow into the Rhinox hide, just to help brighten it up a little bit. Not lots, just enough to make it a visually distinct colour. We're still trying to keep things relatively desaturated and dark, and once that's on the mini, we will be darkening it down if it is too bright, with the acrylic ink mixed in with the Rhinox hide being used as a shade paint. With a lot of the bone and the horns finished, we're now going to start painting some of the rock features on the mini. So there's a stone tablet and some rocks around the basing, and I'll be also using these similar colours for painting some of the metal features, but for them I'll be treating the highlights a little bit differently. So to make my black, what I'm doing is mixing in mostly black acrylic ink with a little bit of paint medium to help make it not split and settle quite so quickly, and I'm adding in just a little bit of that Rhinox hide to give it a not quite true black colouring. It's very hard to shade and work with true black because there's not much that is darker than black. For the highlights, all I'm going to be doing is progressively adding in a little bit of the Administratum Grey into that colour mix, just to sort of take it a couple of steps up for the highlights. Given a lot of this is going to be on the base, I'm not too worried about highlighting it much more than just one sort of edge highlight. But on the metal, what we will be doing is just progressively glazing the brighter colours into sort of smaller patches of shine. We're not looking for a really bright, sort of like non-metallic metal shade here, just enough that it helps to identify the shape, given that the rest of it's quite desaturated and dark. Now we're going to paint the gut component of the Sorcerer, and so for that I'm using a warm purple. So I normally use royal purple from Vallejo's model colour range. It's a really versatile dark purple colour, and it's lovely to play with because it almost slips into the magenta end of the spectrum, which is my favourite sort of colour palette to work with. So what we've done, based it with purple, we've done an ink wash mix like we have with every other step, and then we're highlighting that up with the royal purple, followed by a little bit of Warlock Magenta, I think it is, from the Army Painter's Fanatic range. And again, we're trying to aim the highlights on this a little bit more towards where the sword is, because that's our light source on the mini. But because we also have the flames on the head, you can just do a top down and it ends up looking pretty good. And again, potato fingers in the way meant that a lot of the painting got missed. But with the guts finally painted, we're going to attempt to paint up the sword. And I'm going to show you what not to do, which is to paint straight yellow over black. It is not a very forgiving paint at the best of times. Most yellows tend to be quite thin, and they will show that layer underneath really quite strongly, even with multiple coats. And I was tired because I forgot that I was meant to be basing these all white first rather than black, and it doesn't look good at this point. And I'm only keeping it in there as a reminder to everyone that no matter how long you paint for, mistakes happen, and mistakes are not the end of the world, because there is nothing that cannot be fixed. Although sometimes your fixing is a little worse than the original mistake. As you can see a little bit later on, I'm going to try to fix this fish by putting white ink over top. It must have been fairly late at night, because that is not generally a good way to fix a problem of one paint not covering another. Inks are not good at creating solid color layers. They're really much better at providing a paint medium which will flow into cracks and crevices, which is what this is going to do. It's going to shade the highest parts a bit white, but mostly just settle with cracks, which is not necessarily a bad way to get a fire effect without too much effort, but given that it's over black and yellow, which has tinted everything green, it ends up looking horrific. But again, no mistake that cannot be salvaged. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly whip this over to my airbrush, and we're going to quickly get a much better white and ice yellow base color down on the fire effects. Right, now that my mistakes have been salvaged, we have a much cleaner base color to be working with. And what we're going to do is we're going to reach for our yellow color, which is going to be a Ural Yellow from Citadel. And what we're going to be doing is, with a fire effect, you're painting in reverse. So you want your deepest layers to be as close to white as you can, and your most superficial layers going through a transition of yellow to orange to red to black to grey. With it being a way of trying to mimic a intense fire heat at the center, slowly cooling out towards a red, and then having black and grey ash at the very edges. So with the Ural Yellow, we're covering probably about 80% of the area that I have whited. And then while that's drying, I'm going to take some of that white ink, which is the original reason why I put it on my palette, to start inking in the details on this stone tablet. And you can see that the ink does a much better job at flowing into a crack and settling there with only a little bit of cleanup to make it look nice. Step 2 of the fire, back to the thing I was here to talk about, we're going to mix in some lava orange from the Army Painter. And what we're doing is we're aiming to hit more the superficial components of the flame, and probably about the back half. Although when you are painting flame effects, fire never sits still, and those colors do jump around, so sometimes you can mix that orange into a deeper part and it'll still look good. Sometimes we're going to put some of the yellow on a more superficial aspect. And you want to play around, again, be a little messy. The messier you are with flame effects, typically the nicer it'll end up looking, and all you have to do is just play around with that mix of yellow, orange and red. For the red, I'm using a pure red from the Army Painter, which is a really, really intense saturated red. So it is something which you have to be a little bit careful on normally, because it will sort of really overpower whatever it's going over top of. But for this effect, that's kind of what we want. We want it to be very much hitting the edges of the fire and really standing out quite strongly from the orange and yellow underneath. Right, and now the next thing is we want to put some sort of black ash just on the very edges. So we're going to be doing a dry brush of pure black, just using matte black from the Army Painter. Just that's the black that I have on hand. And we're just looking to hit the very, very tips of the flames and a little bit along those sort of longer ridges in the center. And then when that's kind of at a level where you feel like it is not distracting, but just adding some depth to the fire, coming in with a little bit of a mid-stratum grey to then dry brush over the top of the black to give it the look of different textures and states of ash coming off the flames, and helping to add a little bit of definition to the actual flame sculpt on the model. Coming back to cleaning up the ink white on the stone tablet, we're just going to take those same two dry brush steps, the black and then the mid-stratum grey, and use that across the stone tablet and the feet, although I did edit out me dry brushing the feet. And then just to clean up that white a little bit more, I'm going to take black, water it down to about 6 parts water, 1 part paint, and glaze in some black into the areas where the white is standing out a bit more strongly. Once that's done, I'm then going to get a speed paint red, and then use that over the white to give it a glowing red inside effect. And now, final step for making the model look pretty is we're going to take some Ural yellow, thin it down to that glaze consistency, and then just starting to run that over any of the edges of the model that are facing the flames. And this wants to be a very, very subtle lighting effect, because I want the brightness of the flames to be the most important thing, the first thing that you see on the mini, with the glaze just adding a little bit more continuity across the model. And again, just nice subtle highlighting will do most of the heavy lifting for you. And with that, the Sorcerer is finished with some nice bold flame effects. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed some of the dodgy film quality of this video. I'm working on getting a much better dedicated setup for filming in the future. But if you enjoyed it, give us a like, maybe share it around if you liked the flame effects. It's one of those things where it is not terribly complicated. It's just getting those prep steps of having a darker MIDI than you expect to make those flames pop. So if you've got anything else you want us to be looking at painting in the future, let us know down in the comments. Otherwise, expect a few more Trench Crusade minis in the near future. I'll catch you guys in the next one.